Earlier this year, on the flight to Selma, you said, on matters of race, as president, your job is to close the remaining gaps that are left in state and federal government. Now, how does criminal justice reform fit into that equation, and what gaps remain for you towards the end of your presidency?
On criminal justice reform, obviously I gave a lengthy speech yesterday, but this is something that I've been thinking about a lot. Been working first with Eric Holder, now with Loretta Lynch we've been working on, along with other prosecutors of the U.S. Attorney's Office. It's an outgrowth of the task force that we put together post-Ferguson and the Garner case in New York. And I don't think that the criminal justice system is obviously the sole source of racial tension in this country, or the key institution to resolving the opportunity gap. But I think it is a part of the broader set of challenges that we face in creating a more perfect union. And the good news is that this is one of those rare issues where we've got some Republican and Democratic interest, as well as federal, state, and local interest in solving the problem. I think people recognize that there are violent criminals out there and they've got to be locked up. We've got to have tough prosecutors. We have to support our law enforcement officials. Police are in a tough job, and they are helping to keep us safe, and we are grateful and thankful to them. But what we also know is this huge spike in incarcerations is also driven by nonviolent drug offenses, where the sentencing is completely out of proportion with the crime. And that costs taxpayers enormous amounts of money. It is debilitating communities who are seeing huge proportions of the young men in their communities finding themselves with a criminal record, rendering them oftentimes unemployable. So it compounds problems that these communities already have. And so I am very appreciative of folks like Dick Durbin and Cory Booker, alongside Mike Lee and Rand Paul and other folks in the House who are working together to see if we can both reduce some of these mandatory minimums around nonviolent drug offenses, because I tend not to have a lot of sympathy when it comes to violent crime. But when it comes to nonviolent drug offenses, is there work that we can do to reduce mandatory minimums, create more diversion programs like drug courts? Then can we do a better job on the rehabilitation side inside of prisons so that we are preparing these folks who are eventually going to be released to re-enter the workforce? On the back end, are we doing more to link them up with re-entry programs that are effective? And this may be an area where we could have some really significant bipartisan legislation that doesn't eliminate all the other challenges we've got, because the most important goal is keeping folks from getting in the criminal justice system in the first place, which means early childhood education and good jobs, and making sure that we're not segregating folks in impoverished communities that have no contact with opportunity. But this can make a difference. I met these 4 ex-offenders, as I said yesterday, and what was remarkable was how they had turned their lives around, and these were some folks who had been some pretty tough criminals. I mean, one of them had served 10 years, another was a repeat offender that had served a lot of time. And in each instance, somebody intervened at some point in their lives, once they had already been in the criminal justice system, once they had already gotten in trouble, and said, you know what, I think you can live a different way, and I'm willing to help you. And that one person, an art teacher or a GED teacher or somebody who's willing to offer a guy a job. I want to give a shout out to Five Guys, because one of the guys there was an ex-felon, and Five Guys gave him a job. And he ended up becoming a manager at the store and was able to completely turn his life around. But the point was, somebody reached out to that person, gave him a chance. And so part of our question should be, how about somebody reaching out to these guys when they're 10 or 11 or 12 or 8, as opposed to waiting until they've already gone through a criminal justice program? That's part of why we're doing My Brother's Keeper. But this is an area where I feel modestly optimistic. I think in the meantime, we got to stay on top of keeping the crime rate down, because part of the reason I think there's a conversation taking place is violent crime has significantly dropped. Last year, we saw both incarcerations and the crime rate drop. And this can always turn if we start seeing renewed problems in terms of violent crime. And there's parts of the country where violent crime is still a real problem, including my hometown of Chicago and in Baltimore. And part of what I've asked Attorney General Lynch to do is to figure out how can we refocus attention. If we're going to do a package of criminal justice reforms, part of it would be actually having a greater police presence and more law enforcement in the communities that are really getting hit hard and haven't seen some of the drops in violent crime that we've seen in places like Manhattan, for example.